comments or questions, or David, do you want to?
Would you like me to moderate the questions?
I mean, it's a slide. I don't think we're going to have, I don't think I'll have trouble unless 30 hands go up all at once.
Go ahead.
But so far there's none, so. Oh.
Can you repeat the name of the book that Mr. Bowman wrote?
Oh, it's called Honor, A History. It's a big fat book, but I promise you, it's really, really fascinating. And I feel that book never got its due. It was reviewed, there was a little flurry of attention, and then it kind of dropped out of sight, and I thought, wow, this is to me a book that it's so original, it's so it's bringing such important and so topical, so important for our day. I think it's something that really our chattering classes should read. I think it would be very educational.
Right at the start of your talk, you referred to an incident in Dessau in Germany, and you talked about the turbulent migrant situation. Why can't you just come out and say invasion?
Well, I'm not going to call it an invasion because this is being recorded. I mean, you can call it whatever you like. The fact is that this is a big moment in European history.
Yeah,
and,
but you check out the demographics, and the demographics are almost the same as armies in the 30 Years' War and the civil wars in England and Scotland at the time, with similar incidents happening to camp followers. Because if you look at the number of young men, and then you look at the number of women and children with them, and women following armies tend to get pregnant, as we can guess. And some of the incidents that happened to camp followers in 30 Years' War and the civil wars in the UK and in the British Isles are very similar. And so why can't you just call it invasion?
well, we can call it. I mean, there are people calling it an invasion, and there are people calling it all kinds of things. But it's one of these situations where you can be aware of certain truths, and you can't stop it. I mean, history has a way of.
Well, you probably can.
But I don't know if we should get into it. This is a kind of sidebar to the actual topic.
Well, it's a big background to the topic.
It is the background. It is the background. But it would be happening without the
It's the
invasion.
T-Rex in the room.
I know, but it was happening already before this happened. I mean, Sweden has a problem. England, Rothermere, is it Rothermere or Rotherham? Rotherham. They have a problem. This problem is already happening. It's been happening for the last more than a decade. So that's going to exacerbate it, the invasion, but it's not going to change the general principle of, yes.
No.
So, there's, I've read a lot of stories about either the media underreporting honor killings, you're talking about it again, or misrepresenting honor killings. You talked about your editorial board, and,
No, not my editorial board.
Oh,
They
sorry.
didn't. It was the media, the liberal media in general has, I think, mischaracterized them.
To me, the problem is, I think you're right in saying that the average Canadian can look at this and say, this is an honor killing, this is a problem, this concept we have of multiculturalism is a problem. But if the people that people rely on for their information, which is the mainstream media, aren't providing that information, and if journalists like you aren't able to persuade a libertarian editorial board of the wisdom of some of your analysis, what can be done to change that? Like, what's the process to change it, the opportunity to change that? Where does that conversation start to happen?
Well, it is happening at the margins. I can tell you that, for example, Aruna, who is an anomaly in the sense that she is outspoken about what she suffered, what her clients have suffered, and by the way, I said before, she paid a price. The price is when she wanted to write her book, and I wanted to help her write it, and that was one of the great experiences of my life, was this book. But when she decided to write this book, her entire family said, if you write this book, nobody in the family will ever speak to you again. And nobody ever has. Like, she has a very large extended family. She has grandchildren that she has not seen. since she wrote this book. She has 3 children that no longer speak to her. She has all her sisters and their husbands or families are in Canada or the United States. Not a single one of them has ever spoken to her since. So she is totally isolated. And for someone who has grown up, you know, she told me once, and her family have been very mean to her about it and everything, and her husband, who her second husband is Canadian, of Hungarian provenance, not that that matters, I mean, you know, he's like, well, you know, they've been so horrible to you, and, you know, aren't I enough for you? Like, in other words, like, and they have a daughter together, and she says, no, she says, you don't understand, growing up where there was never fewer than, like, say, 15 people around a table and where you never had even any privacy. I mean, we probably hated that kind of a life, but it's people around you all the time, and you feel you're part of a tribe, you know, and there's a comfort in that. Even when people are bickering or they're mean to you and this one's gossip, you know, they're all talking about each other and they're bad-mouthing each other, but it's life, you feel it. And I can see where it would be very painful and very isolating. And one of the reasons that the young women find it so difficult to get away. I just have to tell you this story of this, and I'm coming back to I'm going to answer your question. I met her when we published this book. I got to say something wonderful about Rona Ambrose, who I adore. I love that woman. When we published this book, she threw a launch for us in the Senate chamber. She and the head of the Senate, in the most beautiful, you know, and she invited everybody in her party, and it was the most magnificent thing. She ordered books for every single one of her staff, and she made them read it. And when we came for the launch, Aruna brought with her the most gorgeous young woman you've ever seen. She's like 16 years old with flowing black hair. I mean, and she told me her story. I just couldn't believe it. She had escaped several times from her family. They took her to Pakistan already. She didn't want to marry the guy. He didn't want to marry her. You know, it's one of those things where, I mean, he understood. He didn't want to marry her either. They forced them to get married, but they didn't have sex. And then when they found out that she hadn't had sex, one of her uncles raped her. Like, you know, it was horrible. Then they came back. They kept her in a room. She tried to get away. The taxi driver was from her community. He says, "What are you doing away from your home? Where are you going? Where are you going?" And she, you know, he turned around and took her back. Anyways, she's like a total nervous wreck, and she finally got away, and Aruna had arranged for her to stay with a neutral person, but she was having like a nervous breakdown. Later she did try to commit suicide. But anyways, the point is that when she came to this launch, and Aruna introduced her to Rona Ambrose, she said, "I wanted to come because I wanted to, I have to tell you my story, I have to tell you my story." The two of them went off into a corner, and I'm watching them, and I'm like, Rona is like looking deep into her eyes, and she's listening, and she's telling, and tears are running down her face. Now, that's real, that's authentic, she really gets it, she really totally gets it. And she has tried to set up a shelter in Edmonton that's just for, because when these women, they go to ordinary shelters, they're horrified by what they're seeing there. This is not for them, you know, they're not trying to live, they just want to be nice people. Like they don't want to reject everything about their background. They just want the abuse to stop. They don't want to leave their families. They do want to stay within their culture. But that's just one part of it that they just can't stand. But to get back to, there are people that know about this. There are politicians that know about this. And there are ways that it could be dealt with. If you bring community leaders, if you say to them, it could be not that hard. You say to community leaders, you say, look, you want grants for your community, for your cultural centers, we'll give you grants. But in order to get those grants, there's certain things we want you, as the community leader, you have to say to your community. You have to take the lead on this. And you have to say, no more of this crap. We're in Canada, that's the end of it. Our women have to be free, and you know, it could help to change. I think there's all kinds of strategies that they could use, and they're not, because again, even people like Rona Ambrose, you can't be too out there with this, because you get pilloried, you get crucified. And I think with this government, I don't think much of what I'm talking about is going to happen at all, because for obvious reasons, but even with a government where everybody got it, Jason Kenney knew, he knows, Harper knew, they all know. And they were trying to incrementally, like they put the words in the immigration guide, you know, barbaric practices, you know, at the source, they were going to have this program where people couldn't come over until they had had a little seminar in what you can and can't do here. So it could be gradual. All you need is the will, and all you need, really, is somebody of stature to say it like it is. Well, that word barbarism was used. You saw what happened when they said it like it was. It just caused a tremendous furor, and then you get the professional activists from these communities. And there's another factor too, and this really bothers me. There are some, like when Aruna goes on TV or she goes to conferences and stuff, they always put her on one side, and then they always find some really articulate and lovely and very empowered lady from woman from South Asia who is a feminist and totally, I don't even know what you're talking about. This maybe in some tribal, but no, life has changed and we're all tremendously alike. I grew up and my father never and my brother never, and you know, so it's like, Aruna, what are you trying to do here? But the fact is that the women who say these things, they're from like Delhi and, you know, Mumbai, and they grew up in educated homes, and their parents had gone to university, and their grandparents had worked in the Raj, and they were very, very exposed to Western culture, and they'd absorbed it. And so, yeah, they grew up in very enlightened homes, but the cities are 15% of, like, there's 1 billion people, and the cities represent 15% of those, and even in the cities. And by the way, even the most educated, enlightened, empowered women in India and Pakistan and everywhere, even those women who only want 2 children, they don't want 7 children, but they also want 1 to be a boy at least, if not 2. They are also having sex selection abortions, even the most educated. So, you know, there's a lot of, it's a bit of a shell game, and the feminist strategic command, they know how to do this stuff, and so you know, they know who to send to talk on the agenda, and they know who to send to talk to the Globe and Mail, and like there's a very articulate sort of you know, kind of activism going on here. I'm not. I think there's stuff that could be done. I don't think it's going to be done right away, and I think we're going to see more of it. In England, for example, in the United Kingdom, they had to have a special police units that only deal with this. That's all, and they're trained. Aruna, by the way, gives she gives courses to police. This is a good sign in itself. She's hired by the police to come and tell them, how do we act if we think something's going on in a home? Because you can't act the same way. Like the Shafia girls, for example, when the police or the social workers went to their home, they asked them in front of their parents, are you being oppressed or whatever, you know. No, nothing to see here. You know, if they had taken them aside, you know, it would have been, so Aruna tells them, here's how you have to talk to a father. You can't talk to the parents like as if, you know, she gives strategic classes to the RCMP out west. She's made several trips out to Alberta. They love her. The RCMP, you know, she comes out there, they take her out for steak dinners and stuff, and like wine her and dine her. They love her because she's really helping them. There are clusters in the West where a lot of this is going on, and she's helping them deal with it in a strategic way rather than just treating it as domestic violence. Because it's not domestic violence, so it's you need other strategies. Anyways, sorry. Go ahead.
Do you think there's any risk the courts in Canada will possibly give lower sentences to honor killings, the way they gave to crimes of passion in the past. I mean, I think of two examples where they don't give equal sentences based on local tradition. One would be, I think, Aboriginal custom
Yeah.
is to be considered, and maybe mental, psychological abuse of women, and they kill their husbands, and then the husbands, and then they get lower sentences, even though it hasn't been.
There is sentencing bias for sure between women and men. We know that. We know that for the same crime, we know that there is a lot of sentencing bias. I think it depends a lot on the individual judge. I think since the Shafia trial, they got what they deserved, and I think that sort of set a benchmark that I don't think they're going to get away with it. There was one famous case, this was many years ago, not that many, but 15 years ago, in Montreal that was really shocking. It was a female judge, a little girl of 3 years old, had been raped by her uncle or cousin, anally raped. And the judge said that in his culture, he had actually spared her virginity because he didn't want to spoil her chances of getting married later. And she actually used that as a kind of mitigation, yeah, and she only gave him something like 2 years or whatever it was. Anally raping a 3-year-old, please, you know. Anyways, yes, there are, but I think it's going the other way. I think at least here, we don't like it. It's not gonna happen.
You've really given us a wonderful explanation of what it seems to me to be us being in the process of committing cultural suicide. I have to say I'm encouraged by some of the positive things you've explained about what's being done, but have you given any consideration to what is and when is the point of no return?
We'll find out. We're watching it right now. We're watching Europe, and we're looking at Scandinavia.
Well, no, I'm speaking more of Canada and the
Oh, I don't
States.
think we've reached anything like to have like actually literally millions of Muslims living apart from the general population. That's not happening here. We get clusters, we get areas, but even in the areas where there's very dense monocultural clusters, you're not seeing the kind of incidents or all the bad stuff like this. There's no Rotherhams in Canada or in the United States. So either it's because we're a different model, or maybe, I don't know, Brian, help me out here, whatever our political traditions and cultural traditions are, they are different from Europe, and maybe we are offering something in the air here that inspires more integration. Maybe they're just generally less prejudiced. I don't know, but it's certainly not as serious, and may never be as serious as in Europe. So I'm not a doomsayer in that sense. I don't think we're necessarily going down the tubes in the same way as it looks like parts of Europe are.
I would say that part of the reason things are a little better here is that percent of the Muslim population is still sufficiently low that it can't press its demands. Like we're at 2% or 3% in France, it's 10% or more. And Peter Hammond, Dr. Peter Hammond of South Africa, he's sort of gone at different levels as the Muslim population rises, it increases its sets of demands.
It's not. I've heard that, and that may be true, but don't forget also why France is such a special case, and also all the former empires.
But Sweden isn't a former empire.
No,
Look
Sweden
what-
is
look
a
what's
better.
happening there.
It's better to look at Sweden because they're more like us.
And
But
this is
France
a problem.
has to take. They've had to take people that normally you'd have an immigration process that would say no, you can't come, or the extremely uneducated, extremely backward, extremely. So our process, at least, there's a filter. There's a certain filter, and also there's not that sense of alienation and hostility that a lot of the Algerians in France they have this cultural memory of the empire, you know, it's not good. But we weren't an empire, so we don't have that baggage, you know, we don't have that baggage.
I'm curious to hear from one of the leaders for this Canadian Association for Equality, and perhaps yourself as well. What this says about men, this multicultural, this different cultural shame, honor, divide, what it says about men and their capacity to control themselves, to love not selfishly, to protect, to nurture, and all that. I understand there are cultural norms, and so they also will have to have their culture a bit diluted and influenced over time. So the father will not live out the culture in Canada the way the son will, because the son will be a bit different, and on and it will go. But at one point I'm wondering when men will speak to men and say, you can do better than this. This is not a measure of your manhood. This is not how you judge a woman, because it's not a reflection on you. I wonder if there's room for that.
Well, I think that's a great. What you're saying is excellent. I like it. I know, for example, Aruna tells me she doesn't just counsel women; she counsels whole families. And she's often told me, she says, you know, I've had young men, sons, come to me and say, I don't know what to do. I don't want to live this way. My father tells me I have to watch my sister and I have to make sure she doesn't do this and do that. I want her to have her own life, and I want to have my own life, and I don't want to be this, you know, and I don't want to have to punish her if she, so the guys are also in a trap, you know, and they also suffer, obviously not suffering in the same way as the women, but they feel they can't get out of this matrix, like they feel that it's a very predestined thing, and they're struggling to break away, but it's just as hard for them to get out of their role as it is for the girls to get out of theirs. But I agree, men have to sort of not be passive about this, because these are other men, and they don't want to be, that's part of the reason, you know, men get stereotyped, is because they're put all in one basket. Oh, all men want control of women, and all men want this, and all men want that, and yeah, we have to hear from the men. Sorry, David, I was going to ask.
I have a question, but.
Okay, no, this, you had your hand up.
In terms of inciting and all that type of stuff that's coming out of the Middle East, that is occurring.
I believe you.
We can't hold the wool over our eyes to think,
yeah,
oh no, everything is rosy and fine and so on and so forth. And I think that it's very important for us not to be naive, to think that everything that the leaders of these organizations are not necessarily buying in to our multiculturalism, and all of this has to be monitored and has to be brought out so that we don't run into situations that is occurring in Europe, because leaders of communities, and since there's a strong religious component, this isn't just a, you know, well, I guess you could call feminism a religion to a certain extent, but if you remove that, this isn't, you know, many thrusts do not have this strong religious component. Because all of a sudden there's a divinity involved, and it's a stronger thrust on the person,
sure.
be it male or female. And so the worry is that if we're complacent and we don't take an approach where we're continually monitoring what is being preached on a weekly, if not daily basis in terms of this, then we're going to run into the situations that are occurring in Europe.
Well, I mean, yeah, we had, look, on a piecemeal basis, we've had terror, the 18, you know, I mean, we've had terror rings broken up. CSIS is very aware of what you're talking about. Right. I assume they're on it on a regular basis, and the fact that we have thwarted several, you know, but now we have this lone wolf thing. The phenomenon you're talking about is, at the highest levels, I think they're very aware. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing about it. You know, when you're in a democracy and there's a certain amount of openness, you cannot stop certain things from happening. It's very frustrating because you want to be able to say, let's monitor and let's do something about it, but doing something about it means, you know, it's like the Bill C-51, right? it's, you have to draw the line between incitement to terror or and just angry people's, we hate Canada or we hate the West. Well, people are allowed to say that in this
And
society.
that I appreciate. My concern is that it has to be called on the carpet, so to speak. That's my concern, is that, yeah, CSIS may be aware of it, so on and so forth, but the general public's not being made aware. And I think that if it became more public, then I think what would happen would be there'd be more discussion, there'd be more debate, and these people would be under the magnifying glass to
There'd
watch
also
what
be
they say.
discussion about how we're harassing one group of people. Every
Well,
time the discussion.
Go into churches then, go into everybody,
I know.
don't do just one,
Listen.
do the whole
Believe me,
group.
I think if there were a way to do it in a way that didn't start this. You know what? I don't think I'm equipped to even tell you about this. I think I'm going to stick to my narrow focus of what I'm talking about because we're getting into a broader.
Right, I appreciate that.
And it's not really my expertise. Yes.
Barbara,
I haven't looked at all myself into Islamic or those cultures, but I have looked deeply into Western culture for, in the gender roots. And what I find is that there is always two sides to the roles. There's always a way that it constricts and a way that there's a payoff. There's always that balance, and it's true for both men and for women. If you look at chivalry, for instance, that arose in the Middle Ages. It goes back to cheval. The horse was the wealthy warriors on the field came with their horses, and because they were so much powerful in battle, there developed this notion of a noblesse oblige, a duty that came with that. That they had a duty to protect the foot soldiers who were so much less powerful. So they got the honor out of that, the prestige out of that went with the duty. The soldiers got the protection, but were noticeably less powerful, were known to be less powerful. If we look into gender culture, the protection of men, the protection of women by men, payoffs both ways, duties both ways. How do you see that balance in the culture that you're talking about here? Can you speak to
You mean
the
here
payoff?
or the South Asian?
No, the South Asian culture.
Well, yeah, they see it as a payoff because the society functions in a certain way. Tribal societies function. They function because tribal law or tribal rituals arise in places where you cannot trust the law to protect you. So you're very much, it's you, your brother, your cousins, like that's who you depend on to protect you from, the attacks or the whatever from other tribes. And the women are completely defenseless without the protection of men. So they think it's a pretty good trade-off, I guess, because they don't know any different. That if they keep themselves, if they obey the code, then they have status within their group. They have what they have. I mean, for them, it's normal. It's normal. Polygamy for thousands of years was a very normal form of marriage bonding. As a matter of fact, I just anecdotally, when I talk to feminists who say, well, you shouldn't tell these women what to wear and it's liberating, whatever it is. I mean, it's their right and it's their idea of modesty and blah, blah, blah. I say, okay, fine. Then I guess you're okay with polygamy because, of course, there are groups like the in Bountiful, the Latter-day Saints. For them, it really truly is a religious obligation. It's not just a custom. It is a religious obligation to have, to have polygamous marriages, and then that draws them up short because they don't approve of polygamy because they think that's extremely oppressive to women. So they say, well, I was talking to one feminist who'd never considered that. I said, well, and if a niqab is okay, and we know that it represents a misogynistic culture, even nobody can deny that. But if it's for religious reasons, then we have to allow polygamy. Oh, well, no, because polygamy hurts children, and the rights of children have to trump the rights of polygamists. So she thought she got out of that. I said, well, we have no studies, except, I mean, the Bountiful group, they're crazy anyways, but look at across the water, and look at all the cultures that have had polygamy as the norm. Now you're going to tell me that all those children, I've met I met a wonderful African young man. He was adorable, and he was from a polygamous, family, and he was one of, I don't know, 12 or 13 children. I said, what was it like? He said, it was actually great, there was always a mom there, and if my own mom wasn't there, then the other mom was, and he says, I said, you don't feel it harmed you? No, not at all. I feel very confident because we grew up in this wonderful, warm, big, and the way he painted this picture of this wonderful family. So there's no studies that show that kids like him are harmed. But so I said to this woman, I said, but we know from studies that children that grow up without fathers have negative outcomes. We know that. So would you agree to ban sperm donorship for single mothers? Ooh, no. And absolutely, that was the end of the discussion. I mean, see, you're not going to get anywhere on reason or evidence or logic or it just there's a kind of curtain that feminists, they will not open that curtain and look at multiculturalism and examine it in the light of their own doctrines, the stuff that they would not allow for their own children, their own daughters. They are perfectly willing to allow for other women because it's part of their culture, and they never really inquired of those women, is this what you want? Is this what you came to Canada for? Do you really want this? So they ask the one woman who goes to the citizenship ceremony, oh yeah, I'm perfectly happy, I chose this myself. Oh good, well then they must all have. Phew, that's a relief, well let's move on, there's a real hypocrisy and there's a real refusal to engage intellectually and with objectivity and with honesty that really I find it so offensive, because these are such empowered women who are saying these things, these terrible things like it's a sign of liberation. That's a terrible thing to say. It really is. It's so dishonest. It's just so dishonest.
But isn't that...
Sorry, you know what? I'm going to go to
Sorry.
somebody who hasn't spoken yet, and that's Janice Fiumingo.
I'm maybe going to say
okay.
something similar to what Gordon was going to say, but I mean, there's so many things that probably contribute to that feminist dishonesty and hypocrisy, and having been a feminist for many years, I know a lot about it, but I mean, part of it is that such a deep-seated sense of self-hatred as Westerners.
Yeah.
And that colors everything, all these discussions of multiculturalism, this
Yes.
shame. And
Yes.
even as I sit here and I'm somebody who, I got past that and I love Western culture, and I used to say, I am Eurocentric to all my academic friends who would always talk, oh, Eurocentrism is so terrible, and I'd say, yeah, I'm Eurocentric, of course, who wouldn't be? It's wonderful, but even like as I sit here listening to you talk, and you use words like we, and you talk about Western, in such a sort of positive, relaxed, easy way, and inside I don't know, it's such a shock being part of this environment where everything Western is associated with slavery and colonialism and xenophobia and hatred and oppression. Everything associated with the other is something that we should be respectful towards. And it seems to go everywhere. I mean, the university is the center of it, but it reaches into journalism, of course.
Yeah, I think we take it in by
culture
osmosis
and-
that we're supposed to hate our own culture. By the way, I found out the actual term for that using the original Greek. It's oikophobia. Oikos means home in Greek. So oikophobia is a hatred of your own home, your own.
How can that begin?
The end of it, I can't see the end of it. It feels like a raging forest fire that we're putting out with buckets of water, like little, at Yale, no, you can't fire these people over this Halloween imbroglio, and over here is another little fire, trying to put that out. I don't see the end of it, unless I keep waiting for the ivy spring, like when when the campuses are going to erupt like the Arab Spring, and I hope nobody sets themselves on fire or anything, but you know, like I just feel there's got to be a revolution. Like in 1968, that was counterproductive in many ways, but it was a real revolution. I think we need one, because nothing else is going to work.
So, I have a question. I remember hearing a story about a Muslim girl who, like, when she was 16, she converted to Christianity and she ran away from home because she was afraid of the wrath of her family. Do you know what her name might be? Or
Converted to Christianity, actually made it? You mean someone in Canada?
I think she was in the U.S. She wrote a book about it.
Is she from Florida? She's from Florida, I think.
Possibly.
And I think,
Is she
Pamela
dead
Geller-
now? Is she dead now?
No,
No.
she actually appeared on that show with Pat Robertson.
Gee, it's ringing a vague bell, but I'm sorry, I don't know who they are.
Okay. You know, the other thing I'd like to point out is, you know, we have a lot of people from these Muslim countries immigrating to the West, right? And we have a certain way of doing things, and they have a certain way of doing things. But like, it's interesting. It doesn't seem to dawn on them that what they're escaping in their old world is actually a system that's not, that just doesn't seem to work as well as the system we have here. And they're also trying to bring with them a certain culture, and yeah, as we see in England, even putting in Sharia law. And in fact, that's actually not good. It's like they're trying to put in place the very system that they were escaping from.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is the problem. A lot of Muslims don't, I mean, they're as upset about it as we are, because that's what they came here for, was to get away from that system. But in England, they've had a problem for a lot longer than us, and yes, there are places in England where Sharia law is the ipso facto, because there are entire towns where, even if it wasn't legally, they would be doing it anyways. So I don't know I have no idea what these countries are going to do. We're not there yet. We may never get there. You remember in 2005, Ontario, Barbara Hall wanted to have Sharia law instituted, and one of her advisors was a very fundamentalist, Wahhabist guy working for her, who was her chief advisor on this, and it came very close. But it did fail, and when it failed, a lot of wiser heads said, wow, we kind of dodged a bullet there. That was not a good thing, and it hasn't come up since. That's encouraging in itself. You'd think, well, that failed, but it would be like the Quebec referendum, and you'd have a whole movement, we'll try again. But I haven't heard any murmurings at all, anywhere in Canada, asking for actual official recognition for Sharia law. Has anybody? I haven't seen any sign of it. So I don't think we should just sort of assume, it's kind of pessimistic and also fatalistic to say, well, we can see what's happening in Europe, it's obviously all going to happen here, because when Muslims are in a certain number of them, that maybe it will, maybe it won't, but I don't think we should assume that it has to be that way. Sorry, who hasn't had a chance yet?
I'm just wondering if you've had a chance to look at the Quran. Like, do you have any kind of a sense of to what extent this actually comes from the sacred writings of Islam?
Sharia law. I haven't read the whole Quran. No, I've read the parts of it that most people bring up when they talk about the problematic parts of it. I personally don't think that sacred texts themselves. I actually don't think that just because a text has something awful in it, that the entire religion is going to be in jeopardy from it. 2 weeks ago or a week ago, I wrote a column about Kristallnacht, and I made a lot of references to Luther, Martin Luther. Martin Luther is more horrible stuff to say about the Jews and the Pope and everything than the Quran has to say about the Jews, and yet there's 72 million Lutherans in the world today, and none of them are openly anti-Semitic. So I don't think it's when you get the people who for whom this is important, to this hatred. The whole idea of hatred as
men and for women, when you look at the rape culture story, what does consent mean if when you change your mind the next day, you're now, if you're a guy, you're now a rapist. Oh, she said yes yesterday, and now I'm a rapist. And how how is this gonna be sustainable? Like, how are men gonna adapt, and what are groups, maybe this is a question for you guys, like equality doing in that conversation?
I think
Have
it's a
you
very,
written about
yeah, I
this?
think it's a tremendously important question.
I want a legal document that you sign.
No, you know what, it is getting crazy. But when I said, I asked a question in there, I asked a question at the beginning, or it wasn't the beginning, but part of the way through. I said, we have not, it used to be the chivalric code, where men, used to be that women set the bar, or set the tone, and they were in charge of where something was going. In the 1800s, a gentleman would walk down the street, and he was not permitted to engage a woman in conversation unless she looked at him first. There were these rules, there were rules. So if she looked at him, then he was allowed to touch his hat. And if she smiled, then he was allowed to smile. But the woman always said, and in my day, the 1950s when I was dating, I never worried about being taken advantage of in my life because I knew it was up to me. And the guy was waiting to see. If he moved in for a kiss, was that going to be okay? Like it was all, the rule was that the girl set the levels of and when so it was understood. But now, there are no rules. There are no rules. And it seems to me that it's a very dangerous situation when men and women do not have codes, something like an honor code. It doesn't have to be an honor code like it's understood in South Asia, but a code where everybody knows the rules. And it goes like this. But if you cross that line, then what happens next is not rape. It might be something you regret, it might be bad sex, it might be whatever. But if you've gone to this, if a woman says, I'm going this far, it's like the guy in Ottawa, if I've got a guy in my room at 2 o'clock in the morning and I hand him a condom, I don't think you can call it rape, what happens next. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So if you don't want to be raped, or you don't want to even have have to worry about it, you don't have a guy in your room at 2 o'clock in the morning drinking and passing him a condom. That would be something you might consider, that would be your responsibility. But if you have a system where women have zero responsibility and the right to call anything they like unwanted sex, which is then parlayed into rape by the time they get to the arbitration board, whatever it is, then you're going to have chaos and you're going to have resentment and hostility and 7-figure lawsuits, which is exactly what's happening in the United States. They're winning big. But it shouldn't have to come to that. So I don't know what the answer is going to be on campus, but what's happening now is insane. At the way back.
Well, I guess earlier.
No, behind you.
Sorry.
I'm trying to get everybody who has this moment. At the window.
No, I just think that we prefer that we're talking a lot about cultural codes and then the wrong kind, but we would prefer that a lot of these sexual ethics be governed in the realm of cultural codes rather than have a top-heavy law coming down, because that doesn't work. We're moving into the realm of requiring, if not, federal provincial law, then university law, where you sign the consent form.
Yeah, it's crazy.
In every university. So it's not going to work. I'm just not as optimistic as you are, because it's the feminists who are teaching young women that they can live under this freedom, anything goes. The men follow suit, I believe, and then we have situations that are very, very painful for young women. It's actually not so terribly fair to say that they can't claim rape, I get that. But it is devastating, these circumstances that occur to many multiple women. I surveyed 500 plus of them, and anonymously the results came back. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt that you hadn't been raped, but something happened you didn't want it to? And much to my surprise, 50+% of those 500 women said they had been in that kind of circumstance. So that is a devastating reality for a lot of young women, and they're taught by feminists that
You're right. It is devastating. I think the women are suffering much sexual liberation in general. The women are suffering far more than the men. I mean, the men who get falsely accused of rape, that's a whole other thing, and that's horrible. That's horrible. But for those who are not accused of rape and who are just, going to frat parties and having a wonderful time, I think the women have bought in.
And that is, you seem to categorize just now that it's women who wake up the next day weepy and so on and so forth, and they regret they shouldn't have it, and men don't do that, and I disagree.
Really?
I disagree. I'm sorry, men have
You agree
changed.
with him?
Yeah, I agree
I,
with him.
men have
I haven't read
changed.
it.
We are not in the 50s. We have hearts, we cry, we feel regret.
Yeah.
When we have sex with a woman who, and the next day, and we have emotion, when we engage intimately with a woman, a piece of us goes with it. It does.
Yeah.
It does. And what happens is, when that woman the next day says, that was a great, I got my rocks off, next guy, oh my God, it crushes us. It crushes us. So I have to object to that, what you've just
All right, I'm
described.
sorry I'm stereotyping, but my understanding is,
Well, I haven't been to university in a long time.
well, let's put it this way. I have read, I don't know if you know Miriam Grossman's book, I forget what the name of it is, but she did counseling at universities. And the number of women that she has counseled, exactly, you at the window, I don't know what your name is, but exactly what you just said, she's also, you know, probably met 500 women. The women are cutting themselves, they're burning, they're having anorexia, the men are not,
And
the
I
men
get
are
it,
not.
because men still have that, are bounded by that, have to be strong, can't, you know, it's all in this brochure. We cannot, you know, show our emotions, our feminine side, we cannot be weak, if we do that, it shows our weakness. No, I'm sorry, that is wrong. Because deep down inside of us, we have the same feelings, we have the same hearts, our hearts break.
Okay, I'm thinking more along the lines of self-judgment. Remember what I said before, women, you know, what's the worst insult? Are you a slut or are you a coward? I think for men to be called a coward is far more wounding than to be called promiscuous. Whereas for women, I don't care if I'm called a coward. If you ask me, like, what would you do if somebody burst into the room and I'd say, dive under the nearest, you know, like, and I expect the guys here to do something about it. But I, you know, call me a slut, hey, you know.
And I understand that, and yes, there's probably still a bit of a divide in that, but I don't think it's all the way that you've described.
No, all right, I didn't mean to be categorical, but I guess I'm talking in tendencies, generalities.
I understand.
If you want to see male distress, you have to look at things like suicide rates and
But I don't think
other
any frat
kinds of
boy
people.
ever committed suicide over a bad hookup. I mean, you know, let's be honest.
I don't know. But
I can't talk about
I know that male
beyond
suicide rates
that.
are 4 times what they are for women.
I know, but not on campus. I don't think guys on
That's
campus.
quite a statement.
Hmm?
That's quite a statement.
No, young men on campus that are killing themselves, the ones I've read about, they usually have problems that, all right, you know, I'm not an expert on this. All I can say is that we're talking really in generalities, and I really believe that women suffer much more, first of all, they suffer much more judgment by their peers. Girls in high school, oh yeah, skank, oh she's a skank. The whole slut shaming phenomenon is not guys only, they're not doing the slut shaming, it's other girls. And if you look at these cases where these girls try to kill themselves, those photos making the rounds, Rihanna, what's her name?
Parsons.
Parsons.
Yeah, it was the girls. It was the girls who were slut shaming her, much worse than the guys. So I think girls judge themselves, they judge their peers, they are much more likely. You know, I'm reminded of this scene in Sex and the City. Remember Sex and the City, the TV series? And all they ever did was sleep around, like they were all liberated. And then they'd sit around over a martini at the table, and one of them would say, "Are we sluts?" You know, women are constantly, I think they are constantly asking themselves this question when they are experiencing all these liberating. Okay, I don't know who to choose now. You've both spoken
Go
before.
ahead.
I mean, well, a couple of things. I mean, so I understand there is kind of that sort of rape culture panic on campuses, but I also know there was a study done where they basically asked this loaded question, you know, if you could have sex with a woman that was not willing to do it, but there'd be no consequences, something like 30% of the men answered yes.
That was a fake study. I saw that study. That was a total.
Okay.
That was debunked.
But another study is, I mean, there are actually studies that show that having a lot of sexual partners before marriage, those marriages are actually less successful than ones where you have a chaste.
To have a good opinion of the people around them, but that opinion, it focuses in on, for guys, I think it really is. There is something in guys, this physical courage thing. It is a isn't it kind of a universal phenomenon? Guys want to be brave, that's why they do sports, that's why they test themselves, take risks. Isn't manliness the willingness to take a risk? That's what Harvey Mansfield says it is. The willingness to take a risk is his definition of manliness. I don't know. Okay, finally, yeah.
Okay. Well, you've explained very well how feminism, it had a purpose in the beginning, a legitimate purpose, and it achieved its goals. And it seems to me that the women who are critical thinkers and independent-minded would have been able to move on. However, it's a little bit like the fox in the chicken coop, because the feminists are now very much in control of what's going through the educational system. How do we grow out of that? We got to take back the educational system, and that's not the only subject. Multiculturalism is another.
It is, and you're right. The educational system is very firmly in the hands of feminists. So is the legal profession, by the way. The social work profession. If you name almost any system, any institution we have, family court, I mean, the people that are training the judges, you know, I don't know if we're going to see this change so very quickly, and I don't expect in my lifetime to see it end. We can only hope for progress on mitigating. I think we are in a kind of race to mitigate enough so that it's not, you know, so that a certain semblance of superficial rights for men, you know.
That brings me back to the cultural suicide.
Well, we may be committing cultural suicide. It sometimes feels that way to me. I feel very hopeless sometimes, and I feel very helpless. I certainly don't think that, you know, when I look back at 13 years of writing on subjects that I feel passionately about, I don't see that I've really had any effect at all. or people like this.
We appreciate reading it.
I know, I have a lot of people who say, oh, I'm glad you're writing this stuff. I mean, I know there's a lot of people out there that take comfort from the fact that I'm even allowed to write about it. But
well, if anything, you maybe slowed the slide down.
maybe, I don't know. You know, when you're when it's like lava, you know, like once a volcano has sort of, you can't stop the lava. Like it just moves across. It's like this migratory flow, you know. It's and you have to sometimes history you have to stand by and watch. You think, oh, if we could just get enough people, we could stop it. Oh, but sometimes you can't. Like there's not enough people, and you can't. All right, last question. Okay, David, I'll let you take over now, because now, you haven't spoken, okay.
Yeah, one of the questions I had was, I remember a few years ago reading Salman Rushdie, and he talked about honor and shame as well in an essay, someone who was, I guess, affected by it very personally himself, and I've used Othello to sort of speak more about that, and one of the things he said was what was peculiar perhaps about Europe was honor and shame was in a way co-opted by the ideas or ideals of forgiveness and redemption, those two things. So I'm just wondering, you know, you touched a little bit on culture, content and culture, like, so what would your thoughts be on those, I guess, those two things as cultural contents, and if they can indeed be, I guess, maybe not peculiar, but universalized, and
you mean forgiveness and redemption?
Yeah.
Well, the only way I see that happening is if Christianity has a tremendous revival and resumes its missionary sense of purpose. Christianity is in self-imposed decline. Europe is secular. Most Westerners are hostile, not just secular. They're actually actively hostile to Christianity because they associate it with imperialism, slavery, I mean, you know, you name it.
So you're saying that, like, forgiveness and redemption is peculiarly Christian and
Yeah, I
wouldn't
think
even
so.
be
Well, I mean, I think
post-Christian?
it's forgiveness and I think the whole, the ideal of, or the central tenet of a religion being love and forgiveness is extremely Christian. Judaism is more about justice, fairness, and the law, you know. But to me, Christianity is about love. And, I mean, that's its ideal, love and forgiveness, and sometimes overly concerned with forgiveness. But Christianity seems to be a spent force, except in places like Africa, which cannot influence global events in the same way that the powerful Western countries can. But, you know, if the people receiving all these other, you know, if these people are, if Muslims are moving into a vacuum religiously, they'll fill it. If there's no pushback, they'll fill it with, you know, and their religion appeals to a lot of people. It's easy to convert people because you have to submit to Allah, and Allah, you know, and it's fate, and it's this and that. It's a very easy, you know, it doesn't require a great deal of effort on your part, does it? And you feel part of this universal, looks like it's going to be triumphant, you know, triumphant. There's a feeling of youth and it looks like a winter religion to a lot of young people because it's going places and it's, you know, it's strong. It's a strong horse. We're the weak horse. I mean, that's a tough call. That's tough to live up to. Love and forgiveness and redemption. Like, these are tough demands, I think. Maybe impossible demands, you know. It's much easier to submit.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you so much, Barbara, for... The best thing about what you did was the level of engagement that we had at the end. We had like continuing dialogue.
Yes, I wish I didn't feel I answered anybody's questions very well at all, but I'm glad so many people have them. That's always a good sign.
So thank you for that. That's really what Cafe is about. It's about stimulating public dialogue about these difficult questions of equality and culture. Thank you so much.
Thank you.